Excellencies, if you'd have asked me 5 years, would I be standing here before you as a senior official at the United Nations, I would have said, not a chance. But here I am. And to follow in the footsteps of my good friend Amina Mohammed, who's been a tremendous leader, and to hear the Prime Minister of Pakistan talk about cricket. Well, where I've come from, cricket is what you put on a fishing line. We don't even understand cricket. I grew up playing baseball in the United States. And when I was a young person too, I made the decision to enter into politics thinking that young people must be a part of changing the world. Of course, that was quite a long time ago. But what I found out in politics, in government, and this is what I hope that you will come away from this summit understanding, that you must be inspired to make a difference in your nation. When I was elected governor in the United States, our unemployment rate was the worst in the United States. Our personal income growth was one of the worst in the United States. We had high welfare and a tremendous number of people depending on government. But we put together a vision and a team, laying aside our political and party differences with an execution that would take place, not worrying about who gets credit, but how do we help the people that need it most. And literally within 2 years, the small state of South Carolina was #1 in America in job growth, #1 in America in per capita international investments, #1 in America in employment. It was all about teamwork, a dream that came true because of a vision being executed by men and women who had a common goal. And when I look at the last 200 years, because it's easy today to fixate only on the negative, only on the worst, but let me give you a backdrop that 200 years ago, there were 1 billion people on earth. 200 years ago, 95% of the people on planet Earth were in poverty. 85% were in extreme poverty. So we have made a lot of progress. Let it not be misunderstood. Today's population, 7.5 billion. Only 25, 30 years ago, it was 5.3 billion. The number of hungry people 25, 30 years ago was over 1 billion people. People that went to bed not knowing where their next meal would come from. And in the last 25, 30 years, we've reduced hunger to below 800 million people. Severe hunger rate going down. Extreme poverty going down. Poverty reduced to extraordinary small percentages around the world. And as the Prime Minister of Pakistan alluded to, China alone reduced the number of hungry people by 800 million people in the last 40 years because they had a plan. But let me give you some bad news. Though wealth has been shared around the world in a way that's unprecedented, we are now seeing for the first time the hunger rate go back up. From 777 million to over 821 million. But this is even more disturbing when you hear this fact. The fact that the extreme poverty rate, and I mean extreme, that means the people that are marching toward the brink of starvation, those who don't know where the next meal is, they literally are marching over a cliff of death. That rate has risen from 80 million to 124 million in just the last 2 years. Conflict, destabilization, poor governance, and let me go on, the issues here and there, climate extremes, and integrated all together, and we have a perfect storm heading our way. But we have solutions, we have answers. We've got more wealth in the world today than any other time period. We have more fluid wealth, $300 trillion of wealth in the world today. And yet, every 5 to 10 seconds, a child dies from hunger. At the World Food Program at the United Nations, We are assisting now over 90 million people on any given day in 83 countries. 80% of our expenditures are in conflict areas. Imagine what we could do with that money, billions of dollars, to go into countries that need development and sustainability. There's a new mindset at the United Nations. As Amina was saying earlier, there's a new mindset because the old mindset shunned the private sector. But today we're seeing that the United Nations and those of us in leadership around the world understand that the private sector is absolutely critical to ending poverty and ending hunger around the world. And the question that we have is, how can we better utilize your experiences, your strengths? Because my goal at the World Food Program is to put the World Food Program out of business. You see, we are developing programs in countries with an exit strategy. It's easy to have an exit strategy when it's a short-term disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake or a volcanic or a tornado or anything of a similar nature. Because you feed the people, you help them in a short term, and you're out. But today's conflicts and destabilization and fragile communities is much more complex. And we're all asking ourselves these questions, particularly with donor countries into countries that have been receiving aid for 20, 30, 40 years, and you have nothing to show for it. And this is why I hope with this World Government Summit that leaders coming together to learn from one another what's working here, what's not working there. How can we be more effective? What can we do better? I remember sitting down with Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid as well as bin Zayed, and we had some very practical conversations. Yes, at the United Nations, are we grateful for the financial support from the UAE? Oh, yes, and many of you in this room, we're very grateful. But I'm even more grateful for the heart, because they've asked me questions that I don't get from many others. Like, what can we do to be better? What do you need from us? What mistakes have we made? What about the children here and the children there? It's the heart that's going to change the world. Money will only go so far. And so we're redesigning how we do things in countries. Before, we would just bring in food, and maybe we bring a lot of food. When you feed 90-something million people, you can imagine how many trucks and airplanes and ships we have on the seas and in the air and on the ground at any given time. But no longer are we just bringing in food. We're now trying to empower smallholder farmers so they can become self-empowered and independent, and particularly in Africa, it's women. Remarkable success stories. I can tell you story after story. I remember just a few weeks ago standing with this woman in Niger. And before we just brought in food. Now we come in with a way of harvesting the small amount of rain they do get there in what we call half moons. And it holds the water just long enough to completely change the landscape of an otherwise difficult area that won't grow hardly anything. And now you look along thousands of acres and you see there's hope, there's green life. And this woman stood there and she said, Mr. Beasley, before I had no hope, I couldn't feed my children. And now with the World Food Program and UNICEF and the United Nations partnering with the private sector and the government, I now have enough income and food to not only feed my children, but also to feed our village. And now we're selling into the marketplace. And she said, I'm buying more land to be more profitable because I want to take those profits and help my neighbor. You see, making a profit is not a bad word at all. It's not a bad concept at all. What you do with that profit will determine your moral character. You see, at the World Food Program, we're not the solution long term, you are. What can we do to partner with you to end hunger around the world? You see, children depend on us, and it's not just about numbers. I've been in the most difficult places on earth. I've seen children starving to death from this side of the earth to the other, and it's heartbreaking. And when we have this much technology, this much wealth, logistical capacity to be anywhere on earth, when children die from starvation, shame on us. I could go on and on. I could put guilt trips on you all day long. But what I'm putting on you now is the burden and the hope of opportunity to help children around the world. Because when children in these very fragile areas have no hope and have no jobs, they turn to extremism. I can tell you from mother after mother that has told me, Mr. Beasley, my husband didn't want to join that extremist group, but we hadn't fed our little girl in weeks. What were we to do? And as I have seen anecdotally, when we come into countries with effective programs, it's amazing what happens. Not just efficient programs, because what good is an efficient program if it's not effective? But with effective programs, along with school meals programs that inspire young people to no longer be stunted but have hope and dreams, and to use this incredible technology today to advance their opportunities, I can anecdotally and experimentally show you the realities that migration by necessity goes down. Marriage rate by 12 and 13-year-olds goes down. Teen pregnancies goes down. Conflict between the herders and the farmers goes down. Recruitment by extremist groups goes down. And when you quantify all of that, it's a lot cheaper to address the root cause than it is to wait after the fact. And what I have also found, and Amina knows this to be the truth, that people actually don't want to leave home if they're given just a little bit of hope. In fact, when you feed 90-something million people, you learn a lot about their habits and their way of thinking. And what we found, for example, in Syria, that people would move 2, 3, 4, 5 times inside their homeland before they would leave. And for us to support a Syrian in Syria is about 50 cents. But you know what the humanitarian cost for supporting that Syrian in Berlin per day is? 150 euros. And they don't even want to be there. They want to be home. I was doing an interview with 60 Minutes about a year ago. And after the interview, this friend, Scott Pelley, was so moved by the World Food Program and what the United Nations was doing. After we demiked, he said, David, he actually said, Governor, he said, you've got the greatest job on earth, keeping people alive. I said, Scott, I do. I really do have the greatest job on earth, but I'm going to say something to you that you haven't thought of, and it's going to bother you. He looked at me like, what could that be? I said, I don't go to bed every night thinking about the children that we saved. I go to bed every night thinking about the children we couldn't save. And when we don't have enough money to reach those children or the access to reach those children, guess what? My team, we have to choose which children eat, which children don't eat, which children live, which children die. I said, Scott, how would you like that job? And he had this, you can imagine, shock look on his face, and he said, oh my God, I never thought about it. I said, sadly, I don't have a choice. You see, your money is important. Your engagement is critical. Your heart will be the building block that will inspire each of us to learn from one another, to end hunger around the world and achieve the sustainable development goals that Amina was talking about just a few minutes ago. Thank you for allowing me to share with you. We are in this together, and together we will continue to build bridges of hope and opportunity. And so, Sheikh Mohammed, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your heart. And thank you for being a role model for nations, governments, and private sector around the world.